Hi, my name's Will Graves. I'm the Chief Engineer for PM DOD Biometrics.
And I'm Janice Kephart. I'm the staff lead for Will for architecture requirements and stakeholder engagement throughout the community. We're here today to do a fireside chat on behalf of Identity Week London. Thanks for having us. We're going to spend about 15 minutes talking about what a next generation identity management system should look like and some of the issues that DOD is encountering that they're planning on revamping, renovating with the next version of their automated biometric information system. So, Will, tell us a little bit about the current ABIS and some of the challenges that you all have currently.
Certainly. So, currently right now, the architecture of the DOD ABIS system is probably about 10 years old. We have a lot of manual processes, which means we have a lot of inject points for bad data to get into the authoritative repository. We still rely on SFTP and SMTP for messaging instead of modern web services. We also have some interoperability problems. We have a standard that we're migrating to a better one, but the current standard is based on the ANSI 2000 standard, so it's a 20-year-old standard. The latest update will have one from the 2015. We're also integrating XML, because right now all the messaging in DoD is still binary based. So those are some of the problems and some of the issues that we have in the current system, and that's what we're going to, when we modernize, we're going to be replacing a lot of that.
Yeah, and one of the other issues has been the issue of modalities and being able to bring new ones in or new vendors in as well, correct?
That is true, yeah. So we are also vendor locked. We have one provider for the back-end system, and in the future we're going to change that paradigm.
So one of the reasons I think it's important to backtrack just for a second, go back up to 10,000 feet and just mention that the biometric in a system like DoD is so important in this environment because you have a chaotic kind of collection and a difficult collection in the DoD environment. And so the biometric becomes the core for the match. And so a reliable biometric that might make a person end up on a watch list, it's really important to get that right. So going forward, what do you see as some of the biggest requirements, and then we can drill down on them going forward for a next generation system?
Right, so some of the largest requirements that will change from what we have now into the future is we're going to be a cloud-based system. We do have a DoD mandate to go to the cloud. We're also going to be doing things like we're going to have the best breed for each modality. So let's say one vendor has the best fingerprint algorithm, but their face algorithm or their iris algorithm, if they have them, may not be as good.
Right.
So what we'll do is we will be able to have almost a plug and play environment, have a local service bus or a middleware tier that says I can plug and play different matchers. And then we will also be able to take all of that information from face, finger, iris, palm, and in the future we're going to integrate voice, and then we're going to have a DNA reference. The DoD does not have DNA information in the DoD ABIS system. There are other organizations that have DNA databases, but we'll have a reference number, and we can tie the DNA back to the face, finger, and iris, so we can have that complete picture of who that individual is. That's kind of some of the
requirements that are really important.
Oh, and the data backend is also a huge piece right now.
Of it as well.
So if we open up our system to NATO or foreign partners, we need to have a way to encrypt and basically protect our data. So there's certain individuals who we protect data for that they may not want to have somebody else have access to. So let's say if the UK provides a piece of data and another organization wants to hit that data, but the UK says no, we need to have that sort of protection environment where if they run against the system, it'll just pass over that enrollment and just keep on going, so they won't have access to that data. That's very important for protecting people's privacy, for Europeans and U.S. citizens, the Europeans with the GDPR
right.
Protections as well. So because we're going to open up to NATO in the future, we need to be able to make sure we have that protection in place.
Right. So one of the things that you're hitting on is one of the major requirements, and people talk about a service-based architecture, but there's not really an understanding of what exactly that means. So could we discuss that a little bit? Rules services is one of them, which is what you just mentioned.
Right.
But what does a service-based core architecture mean? How is it different from what we have today? And what does it mean for the users going forward?
Right. So the difference between what we have today is mostly a spaghetti coded. Everything is basically together. You can't pull out a piece or add a piece without affecting the entire system. So what we're talking about when microservices architectures, you can actually create a service, implement a service, or remove a service without touching the rest of the system or without impacting the rest of the system. It's all those microservices are based on the data that you have in your system. So it's much easier to not plug and play, but agilely add or remove services as your organization sees fit. And that is the biggest thing, because right now when we have our monthly maintenance releases, we have to take the system down for hours.
Right.
In the future, this system, we won't have to do that. It will be in the cloud. We'll have a backend up instance still running while we update some of those pieces. So the entire system doesn't have to go down. So we don't have to go out and tell everybody in the world, hey, by the way, in these 8 hours on this date, don't do any biometric missions because the system will be down.
Right.
Now, we will have the capability, right now to hold those in a queue, and then when the system comes back up, we can crank those out. But in the future, we won't have any more downtime. We'll be able to say this service is updated, that service is updated, this service is updated, and as long as those services aren't being utilized at that time, people can still get match requests.
So that's part of your virtualized environment too, and that's why a virtualized environment helps. A secure virtualized environment helps.
That's correct. And when we talk about cloud, we're not talking about going to Amazon or Google and whipping out a credit card and swiping it.
Right.
What we're talking about is level 5 certified clouds in the DOD or the government that are equipped and have all the security protections for PII information.
Right.
Because we are talking about biometrics, and it's some of the most critical PII anybody can have.
Right. In some instances, you might need some portion of the system to be on premises or somewhere close by to make sure you meet security requirements.
That
right?
is true. Yeah. So we have to look at the NIST, risk management framework and all the controls that are necessary. And sometimes, because of security, we won't be able to be completely in the cloud. We could have some hybrid type of model.
Right.
Especially for data that is very sensitive, we may have an on-prem cloud instance.
So another requirement for the next gen system would be person centricity. That's another term that is nebulous and somewhat undefined. Can you please explain what that means and why it's important to a system to have it be person centric?
Right. So right now we have a bunch of encounters, right? And so I've encountered you, let's say 5 times. And every single time I take your contextual information, your biographic information, some other contextual information, and your biometrics, right? And supposedly all of those things together would create an identity. But in the DOD, we have other people who look at or add to those biometric encounters. So say the inject, an analyst could find another piece of information.
Right.
And all those pieces of evidence and all those pieces of information actually correlate into one identity from multiple streams of information.
Right, right. So it's important because it changes how the architecture is. It changes how the architecture is created and how it's implemented, which is important. The other piece that I hear you talk about often, I think it's important for people to talk about, is why a single data protocol is so critical to the system. Most people talk about architecture, they're thinking about the hardware and the software, and they're not thinking about the actual data itself, which is the core.
Right.
So let's just chat about that for a second.
Yeah, so right now you have to have your data discoverable. And and when you have multiple protocols, you have multiple instances of software trying to translate from one protocol to another. So having one single protocol, a standardized protocol across all interfaces is extremely important for interoperability. So like when we implement the EBTS standard, it's utilizing the National Information Exchange Model XML tags. And those XML tags are the same in the FBI, in DHS, NATO with the STANAG 4715, the XML version of that will also be implementing that, and Interpol is now implementing their own XML version of that. So as long as we're all using XML, we're all using the ANSI standard, we're all using the National Information Exchange Model XML tags, that means I don't have to do any sort of translation. That means I could take an EBTS version from the FBI or an IXM version from DHS or from NATO or Interpol, and it comes into my system boundary. I know exactly what all those data attributes are because they're exactly the same internally for us. So it makes interoperability much faster. And NEAM also has something called an Information Exchange Packet Documentation, an IEPD, which basically describes how you have an exchange, and those exchanges are best practices and lessons learned in those. And so people can go and they can go to the biometrics domain in neam.gov and reach down and grab an IEPD, and so they can see how an exchange of information, not the information itself, just the exchange, how that's been implemented between two organizations, and it can rapidly speed up development.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you're talking about this, you're not talking about just a domestic interoperability. You're talking about international partnerships and the ability for biometric information sharing amongst nations as well.
Absolutely. I've been involved with interoperability since I was the DHS, and I was the delivery manager for the interoperability between the FBI and DHS. So interoperability for over a decade has been something that I've been extremely interested in. And being here and working at NATO, it's absolutely critical that everybody has that same standard and everybody can talk that same language. Now, maybe they have additional data protections inside their system, so you may not get all the data you're looking for, but you'll never know that. But what it will do is it basically enhances that interoperability because it's much easier just to reach out to all these different systems. Internally, you control your own data, but externally, you can actually have those interfaces.
Yeah, it makes everything, and bringing us to interfaces, one last thing is web services and its value to the users across the board. Yeah,
so right now we have a lot of people in the DOD who work in extreme environments and degraded networking environments. Right. And so having web services where if they have a break in the connection while they're transmitting, it's not a complete failure, because once they get back into range of a network, they can continue on with that web services transaction. It's much more difficult if you're using SFTP or SMTP, and if you lose that connection.
File transfers or email.
So email.
File transfer or email. It was the reference there.
Yeah. But that whole transaction fails.
Right.
And when you're on, at the pointy end of the spear, taking transactions in austere environments or you don't have time to continue to look at your handheld or whatever you're collecting biometrics on to make sure that thing is passed correctly.
Yes.
So
one last thing in closing, which is a completely different kind of question, but if you're a nation out there who has not stood up an identity management system yet, where do you start?
So you can start many places. You could work, if you're in a NATO country, you could go to the biometric working group at NATO. You could come to the United States. You could come to the Department of State and start something called a Foreign Military Sales. And we have delivered biometric ABIS systems to multiple countries who have, and we have a few more that are in the process. So you can come to the United States. It actually comes to our shop, and we can develop a system for you. And if you do that right out of the box, one of the main questions that we solve for you, the requirement, is that interoperability out of the box, absolutely. Whether it's NATO, whether it's if it's Interpol, whether it's DOD, we basically build that system from the ground up because we have over 15 years experience in deploying DOD or DHS or any type of system.
And just one thing to clarify there, which was interesting to me when I started working with you, is that a foreign military sale, even though it has military in it, the actual use case for that biometric system need not be military to fit and have somebody like Will Graves be helpful and supportive to you.
Yeah, that's
it
correct.
Need not be a military. And it could also be handheld devices and that sort of thing as well, anything biometric, correct?
Yep, that is correct,
Yep.
yeah. So when we did the Bulgaria system years ago, they actually use it for border management.
Yeah.
And so absolutely
Yes,
does not have to
absolutely.
be.
Well, thank you. I think our time is up. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Identity Week, again for having us.
All right, thank you very much.
To recap a little bit of what Will just discussed, the U.S. Department of Defense Automated Biometric Information System is the repository for all of biometrics collected, submitted, matched, and stored in the DoD environment, and it supports partners in the United States and elsewhere. It has modalities that include iris, finger, palm, face, and latent prints, and its most important output is the biometrically enabled watch list. Since its match results are so important to building that biometrically enabled watch list, there are critical things that the system needs. These things going forward do not necessarily exist in the current system, but would be necessary in a future system to assure the best possible results. These include high-grade biometric algorithms that are ability to be plug and played, multiple modalities, including voice, person-centric, service-based architecture, web services as the primary communication tool, one single data protocol, and a virtualized platform with the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in time. Also, it should be auditable with clear rules. We thank you for your time, and please feel free to reach out to us if you need to or if you're interested in learning anything more. Thank you so very much.